Hey there, I'm happy. 50 years on this earth, mostly out here in the wild with the bears and birds as my truest friends. Out here, you learn real quick what's genuine and what ain't. Today, I'm telling you a city tale about a billionaire father who hid his vast wealth, playing a humble mechanic just to raise his son with a heart of gold. When arrogant corporate bullies try to crush them, they find out fast that true strength ain't in fancy suits, but in honest hands. Where are you folks listening to this tale from? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more. The rain in Seattle rarely falls in straight, predictable lines. Instead, it drifts. It is a fine, endless mist sweeping off the dark waters of Puget Sound, softening the jagged steel and glass of the downtown skyline into something almost muted and gentle. It is a city of two distinct faces, the soaring corporate towers piercing the gray, heavy clouds, and the quiet, damp pine forests resting on the outskirts, keeping their own ancient secrets. The juxtaposition of immense wealth and quiet nature has always defined this place. I have watched one of those secrets grow and take root in this damp earth for 24 years. My name is Wilder. I hold the peculiar and rather invisible title of Chief of Staff at Sterling Enterprises, though my actual job, the only one that truly matters, has always been to protect the quietest, most monumental lie Arthur Sterling ever told. I am the observer, the keeper of the gates, and the only man alive who knows the entire truth. Arthur Sterling is not a man who looks like he owns a $14 billion technology empire. Even when forced into his bespoke boardroom suits, he carries the heavy, unpolished architecture of a laborer. He is 62 years old, with a jawline that looks as though it were carved from granite and thick, iron gray hair that adamantly refuses to lay flat. His eyes are a pale, assessing blue, the kind of eyes that can strip a quarterly balance sheet or a liar down to the studs in a matter of seconds. But it is his hands that tell the absolute truth about who he is. They are broad, thick-knuckled, and permanently calloused. He made his very first fortune building and repairing engines, not writing software. When his wife died, bringing their only son, Liam, into the world, something foundational inside Arthur broke and then hardened into steel. He looked at the vast, suffocating wealth he had amassed and saw only a poison, a golden cage that would inevitably rot a young boy's soul. So, he made a choice, a profound, terrifying choice. He bought a small, drafty wooden house at the very edge of the city limits, flanked by towering, silent Douglas firs. There, he was not the chairman. He was just Arthur, a weary, hard-working truck mechanic who came home smelling of exhaust and grease. They shared this humble home with Buster, a 12-year-old golden retriever mix with a rapidly graying muzzle and severe arthritis in his back hips. Buster was a rescue, a dog whose early years of neglect had left him skittish around loud noises and sudden movements, but fiercely, quietly loyal to the boy who patiently fed him scraps from the dinner table. Buster was the guardian of the wooden house, an anchor of normalcy. Liam grew up believing the smell of motor oil, rain, and sawdust was the scent of a good day's work. He is 24 now, inheriting his father's broad shoulders and quiet, simmering intensity, but softening it with a kind of earnest, open-faced empathy that belonged entirely to his late mother. Liam has dark, unruly hair, and a posture that always leans slightly forward, as if he is perpetually ready to step in and help, always ready to bear weight. He spent his entire childhood watching his father scrub black grease from his fingernails at the kitchen sink, absorbing the silent, heavy lessons of a dollar earned through sheer physical exhaustion. Liam learned early that pride is not something you can buy, it is something you must build with your own hands. Because of this deeply ingrained philosophy, Liam did not rest on inherited laurels he didn't even know existed. He fought for every grade, every academic scholarship, and when he graduated with top honors in engineering, he applied for a junior position at a company he had long admired, Sterling Enterprises. He thought the name was a cosmic joke, a funny little coincidence he brought up over a cheap domestic beer with his father on the back porch, completely unaware that the man sitting across the table owned the very skyscraper he was desperately trying to enter. Arthur had simply smiled, clinking his bottle against his son's, and told him to work hard and keep his head down. Now, Liam operates as the deputy head of product development on the 32nd floor. He has earned his way up, piece by piece, idea by idea, navigating a corporate ecosystem that does not care about his fictional mechanic father. But true talent, in places like this, is often perceived as a threat. That brings us to Richard. Richard is the director of the department, a man of 48 who wears custom Italian suits that always look just a fraction too tight, as if his own ego is constantly expanding and straining against the expensive fabric. He has slicked back hair, a thin, perpetually sneering mouth, and the calculated, practiced charm of a corporate predator. Richard is a man who climbed the corporate ladder not by building innovative things, but by systematically stepping on the hands of those who did. He recognized Liam's brilliance immediately, and he deeply hates him for it. Richard ensures Liam is constantly buried in administrative paperwork, quietly stealing the credit for Liam's successful product optimizations, while seamlessly pushing the failures and budget overruns onto Liam's desk. Liam endures this psychological warfare with the steady, unyielding patience of a man who knows that storms eventually pass. It was 4:15 on a damp Tuesday afternoon when the dynamic of the 32nd floor permanently shifted. I was reviewing internal security footage from my office, a habit I maintained to silently keep an eye on the boy when I saw it happen. Clara stood outside Richard's glass-walled office, clutching a thick presentation binder to her chest like a physical shield. Clara is a 22-year-old intern, possessing a brilliant mind but painfully fragile in her demeanor. She is small, almost bird-boned, hiding her sharp intellect behind oversized, wire-rimmed glasses and a wardrobe of heavy, oversized sweaters that suggest she would much rather disappear into the background than be actively looked at. She comes from a working-class neighborhood, much like the one Liam grew up in, a background that left her with unparalleled technical skills, but absolutely no armor against the ruthless, bloodthirsty politics of a corporate tower. She had just pitched a revolutionary green technology initiative to Richard. It was an algorithm designed to reduce the massive cooling costs of our global server farms by 30% using recycled ambient air. It was, quite frankly, a billion-dollar idea. Richard had laughed at her. He didn't even bother to read past the executive summary. He told her, in a voice intentionally loud enough to carry through the thin glass walls so the entire floor could hear, that interns were there to fetch lukewarm coffee and format spreadsheets, not to play at being visionaries. He dismissed the project entirely, brutally, simply because Clara had no pedigree, no internal leverage, and absolutely no backing from senior management to make him look good to the board of directors. I watched through the camera feed as Clara retreated to the hallway, her narrow shoulders trembling, the heavy binder slipping from her weak grip and crashing to the carpet. She was trying not to cry, trying to make herself as small as possible under the fluorescent lights. Then, Liam was there. He had watched the entire humiliating exchange from his desk across the floor. He walked over, his stride measured, deliberate, and entirely calm. He did not offer her empty corporate platitudes. He simply crouched down, picking up the fallen binder, brushing an invisible speck of dust from the cover before gently handing it back to her. He looked at Clara, not the way a superior looks at a lowly intern, but the way a seasoned mechanic looks at a broken engine with the absolute, unwavering certainty that it can be fixed. "It's a very good design, Clara," Liam said, his voice low and steady, echoing the cadence of a man entirely used to speaking over the roar of heavy machinery. "The thermal dispersion metrics are solid. I read the draft you left on the communal printer yesterday." Clara blinked, her hands shaking as she pushed her glasses up her nose. "Mr. Sterling, the director said it was garbage. He said it won't go anywhere because I don't have anyone to champion it. I don't have anyone to protect the idea." Liam looked over his shoulder toward Richard's office, his jaw tightening just a fraction of an inch. He knew exactly the cost of defying Richard. He knew it meant more late nights, more stolen credit, more quiet, grinding warfare. But Liam was his father's son. He had been raised in a wooden house where you absolutely did not walk away from someone who needed your help, and you certainly didn't let a well-dressed bully dictate the true value of hard work. "You have a champion now," Liam said softly, looking back into Clara's eyes. "We are going to refine the prototype. We are going to build out the back-end code together. And when it's completely bulletproof, we will put it on a desk that actually matters. I promise you, Clara. We will finish this project, no matter what it takes." He stood there in the sterile light of the 32nd floor, a young, earnest man entirely unaware that he actually owned the very floor beneath his feet, fighting tooth and nail for the soul of a company he thought he just worked for. And from my desk, watching the monitors in the dark, I smiled, knowing with absolute certainty that Arthur's legacy was already safe. Chapter 2. Arrogance in the Lobby. Time is a relentless force, But inside the sprawling architecture of Sterling Enterprises, it is measured not in years, but in fiscal quarters, product launches, and quiet battles of attrition. 3 years had passed since Liam picked up Clara's fallen binder from the carpet of the 32nd floor. True to his word, Liam had worked tirelessly. He and Clara had spent countless late nights refining the green technology algorithm, quietly pushing it through the grueling phases of development, while expertly dodging Richard's relentless attempts to derail their progress. As the chief of staff, I watched it all from the shadows, ensuring their path was just clear enough to traverse, but steep enough to test their mettle. However, I was not the only one keeping a close eye on the boy. The only other person who understood the true gravity of Liam's presence in the building was David Chen. David serves as the Chief Operating Officer of Sterling Enterprises. He is a trim, sharp-featured man in his mid-50s with meticulously groomed silver hair and a wardrobe consisting exclusively of tailored midnight blue suits. To the outside world, David is a ruthless, hyper-competent corporate strategist, a man whose mind operates like a supercomputer. But beneath that icy exterior lies a fierce, unwavering loyalty. 20 years ago, during a hostile corporate buyout that nearly destroyed David's career and reputation, Arthur Sterling was the only man who stepped into the fire to pull him out. David never forgot that debt. Once a month, under the guise of an early morning golf game, David would drive his sleek black sedan out to the muddy, pine-scented property at the edge of the city to deliver a highly classified, verbal report directly to the chairman. On this particular Tuesday morning, David stood in Arthur's rustic kitchen, carefully sipping black coffee from a chipped ceramic mug, while Buster, the aging golden retriever, snoozed contentedly across his expensive Italian leather shoes. David had just delivered the news. Liam had successfully maneuvered the green cooling project through its most difficult stress testing phase. Despite Richard covertly slashing their departmental budget, Liam had managed to salvage the prototype by negotiating directly with the supply chain vendors, using nothing but his sheer technical knowledge and earnest persuasion. Arthur sat at his worn wooden dining table, his calloused hands resting flat against the wood. When David finished his report, a slow, immensely proud smile broke across Arthur's weathered face. It was the kind of pride that money could never buy, the validation that his son had not only survived the brutal corporate ecosystem, but had conquered it with his integrity entirely intact. Arthur decided right then that a milestone like this required a proper celebration, not a lavish dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant, but a celebration rooted in the life they actually shared. He stood up, retrieving his favorite, threadbare, red and black flannel shirt from a hook by the door. He spent the next hour carefully preparing Liam's favorite meal, a massive, slow-roasted beef sandwich on thick sourdough, wrapped tightly in aluminum foil, accompanied by a thermos of hot black coffee. Arthur wanted to surprise his son, to walk into that towering skyscraper just as a father, bringing a hard-working man his lunch. He gave Buster a gentle scratch behind the ears, climbed into his rusted 1998 Ford pickup truck, and began the long drive into the heart of Seattle. While Arthur was navigating the morning highway traffic, a very different kind of drama was unfolding on the ground floor of Sterling Enterprises. The main lobby of the headquarters is a sweeping, intimidating expanse of imported white marble, towering glass panels, and brushed steel. It is designed to make you feel small, and the undisputed gatekeeper of this grand, intimidating space was Marcus. Marcus was the lobby manager, a man in his early 30s who treated his position less like a hospitality role and more like a feudal lordship. He was a slender man with a sharp, pointed nose and hair that was heavily lacquered with expensive gel, swept back into a rigid pompadour. Marcus wore suits that tried desperately to mimic the bespoke cuts of the C-suite executives, accessorized with an oversized, gaudy gold-plated watch that he loved to subtly flash at visitors. Years ago, Marcus had been bypassed for a junior executive promotion due to his lack of a college degree, a rejection that had deeply embittered him. To compensate for his profound insecurity, he aggressively exerted his authority over anyone he deemed beneath his station, flattering the wealthy board members while relentlessly bullying the junior staff, the delivery workers, and the interns. That morning, the Seattle rain was falling in heavy, miserable sheets. Clara entered the lobby, her oversized raincoat dripping wet. She was no longer a timid intern. She was now a full-time junior engineer, though she still carried her signature quiet anxiety. Today, she was struggling to carry two large, incredibly heavy metallic thermal boxes, the physical prototypes of the very cooling units Liam had helped her design. The boxes were awkward, obscuring her vision as she shuffled across the pristine marble floor toward the main elevator banks, desperate to get them to the 32nd floor for the afternoon presentation. Marcus spotted her immediately. His eyes narrowed, focusing on the small puddles of rainwater dripping from her boots onto his immaculate floor. He strode over, his polished dress shoes clicking sharply against the marble, and physically stepped into her path, forcing her to halt under the heavy burden. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension, loud enough for the passing security guards to hear. "This is the executive lobby. We do not transport industrial hardware through the main arteries of this building. It violates the aesthetic protocols. You will need to take those contraptions around the back to the loading dock and use the freight elevator with the rest of the garbage." Clara swayed slightly, her arms trembling under the weight of the metal boxes. "Marcus, please," she stammered, her knuckles turning white. "The freight elevator is down for maintenance this morning, and these prototypes are highly sensitive. I just need to get to the 32nd floor. It will only take a minute," Marcus sneered, checking his flashy watch with a theatrical sigh. "Your inability to manage logistics is not my problem. Turn around, or I will have security escort you off the premises for creating a hazard." Clara bit her lip, tears of frustration pricking the corners of her eyes. She began to pivot, heavily resigned to dragging the massive boxes back out into the freezing rain, when a pair of strong, familiar hands reached out from behind her, effortlessly lifting one of the heavy metallic crates from her grip. Liam stood there, his dark hair slightly damp from the morning commute. He did not look at Clara. His eyes, cold and focused, were locked entirely on Marcus. Section 4, Paragraph 12 of the Building Operations Manual, Liam said, his voice steady but carrying the low, dangerous hum of an engine about to redline. "Employees transporting sensitive intellectual property are permitted to use the central elevators at any hour, regardless of the physical dimensions of the prototype, provided it does not pose a chemical threat. These are ambient air cyclers. They are perfectly safe." Marcus's face flushed an ugly shade of red. He puffed out his chest, stepping closer to Liam. "Listen here, Mr. Sterling. I manage this lobby." "I say, what goes up those elevators?" "You manage the flow of the lobby, Marcus," Liam corrected him smoothly, shifting the heavy box in his arms without breaking a sweat. "You do not manage the people. Clara is a vital engineer in this company, and you will speak to her with the respect she has earned. Or I will personally file a formal harassment complaint with Human Resources before I finish my morning coffee. Now, step aside." For a long, tense moment, the two men stared at each other. Marcus possessed the hollow arrogance of a bully, but looking into Liam's eyes, he recognized the unyielding, immovable grit of a man who actually knew how to fight. Swallowing his pride, Marcus took a stiff step backward, gesturing mockingly toward the elevators. "Have a wonderful day, deputy," Marcus spat, intentionally emphasizing Liam's mid-level title like an insult. Liam ignored him. He gave Clara a reassuring nod, and the two of them walked past the fuming lobby manager into the waiting elevator. As the silver doors slid shut, Marcus stood in the center of the lobby, his hands balled into tight fists, his pride utterly bruised by a man he considered a nobody. He swore to himself that the next time Liam, or anyone connected to him, stepped out of line, he would make them pay dearly. Marcus had no idea that at that exact moment, a rusted 1998 Ford pickup truck was pulling into the visitor parking lot just outside the glass doors, carrying an old man in a faded flannel shirt who was about to turn Marcus's entire world completely upside down. Chapter 3. The Uninvited Guest. The automated glass doors of Sterling Enterprises slid open with a soft, expensive whisper, admitting a gust of damp Seattle wind and a man who looked entirely out of place. Arthur Sterling stepped into the cavernous, immaculate expanse of his own building, his heavy, rubber-soled work boots leaving faint, watery footprints on the imported white marble. He wore his favorite faded red and black flannel shirt, a worn canvas jacket, and jeans that were permanently stained with phantom motor oil. In his rough, calloused hands, he carefully held a battered canvas tote bag containing the warm, foil-wrapped beef sandwich and a dented steel thermos of coffee. To anyone observing, he was just a weary, aging mechanic seeking shelter from the rain. But Arthur's pale blue eyes swept over the towering glass panels, the modern art installations, and the bustling, suit-clad professionals with the quiet, structural appraisal of a man who had built it all from the ground up. He felt a profound sense of warmth in his chest, not for the billions this building represented, but for the son who was working tirelessly somewhere on the 32nd floor. Unfortunately for Arthur, the lobby was currently under the watchful, vindictive eye of Marcus. Still seething from his humiliating encounter with Liam earlier that morning, the lobby manager was pacing near the front reception desk, his polished shoes clicking sharply, desperate to reassert his authority. The moment Marcus's eyes landed on Arthur, his sharp nose wrinkled in profound disgust. He saw the wet boots, the frayed collar, the canvas bag, and immediately categorized the older man as an easy, defenseless target to vent his bruised ego upon. Beside Marcus stood Officer Davies, a newly hired security guard. Davies was a hulking, broad-shouldered young man in his 20s with a shaved head and a naturally timid disposition that completely contradicted his intimidating size. He constantly shifted his weight from foot to foot, avoiding eye contact with anyone, clearly terrified of losing his job in his first month. Marcus snapped his fingers at Davies, gesturing toward the entrance, but didn't wait for the nervous guard to act. He marched aggressively across the lobby, physically blocking Arthur's path to the elevator banks. "Halt right there," Marcus barked, his voice echoing loudly enough to draw the stares of several passing executives. "Where exactly do you think you are going?" Arthur stopped, offering a polite, easy smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Good morning to you, too. I'm just here to drop off a hot lunch for my son. He works upstairs." Marcus looked Arthur up and down, his sneer deepening into a look of absolute revulsion. "I highly doubt anyone related to you works in this building, old man. This is the global headquarters of Sterling Enterprises, not a soup kitchen. Look at your boots. You are tracking filthy rainwater all over my marble floor like a common beggar. We do not allow vagrants to wander in off the street to solicit our employees." Arthur's smile did not entirely vanish, but the warmth behind it cooled into something firm and immovable. He had spent decades dealing with men whose arrogance vastly outweighed their actual worth. "I assure you, I am not soliciting anyone," Arthur said, his voice dropping into a low, even cadence that commanded a strange, quiet gravity. "I have a lunch for my boy. If you'd prefer, I can leave it at the front desk, and you can call him down. There is no need for insults, son." A little basic human respect costs you absolutely nothing. Respect is earned, and you have no place here. Marcus spat back, stepping closer, emboldened by the old man's calm demeanor, mistaking it for weakness. "Davies, grab this beggar's bag and escort him back out into the rain before he dirties the upholstery." Officer Davies hesitated, taking a reluctant half-step forward, his face flushed with visible guilt. He looked at Arthur's gentle face and the lunch bag, entirely torn between basic human decency and the screaming demands of his manager. Just a few yards away, emerging from the ground floor printing center, Clara stopped dead in her tracks. She was clutching a stack of freshly bound, glossy portfolios needed for the critical afternoon presentation of the green technology project. Her heart was already racing with anxiety about the upcoming pitch, but the loud, cruel echoing of Marcus's voice cut through her corporate stress. She peered around a marble pillar and saw the lobby manager actively harassing an older man in a flannel shirt. Clara squinted, adjusting her oversized wire-rimmed glasses. There was something incredibly familiar about the broad set of the man's shoulders and his thick, iron-gray hair. Then, it hit her. It was the photograph. Every time she sat at Liam's desk to review their back-end code, she saw the small, unpretentious wooden frame sitting next to his monitors. It was a picture of Liam standing next to this exact man in front of a rusted pickup truck, both of them covered in engine grease, both of them smiling the exact same earnest way. It was Liam's father, the mechanic. Panic flared in Clara's chest, immediately followed by a fierce, protective surge of adrenaline. Just hours ago, Liam had stood like a shield between her and Marcus's bullying. Liam had risked his own standing to protect her dignity and her project. She could not, would not stand by and watch his father be humiliated by the exact same tyrant. Dropping her heavy portfolios onto a nearby visitor sofa, Clara fumbled wildly in her coat pocket for her phone. Her fingers shook as she quickly typed out an urgent text message and hit send. "Liam, emergency in the main lobby. Marcus is harassing your dad. Come down now." Without waiting for a reply, Clara shoved her phone back into her pocket and practically sprinted across the lobby. "Stop it! Leave him alone!" she yelled, her usually soft voice cracking with unprecedented volume and bravery. She inserted herself directly between Arthur and the furious lobby manager. Marcus recoiled in surprise. But when he realized it was only Clara, the timid junior engineer he had tried to banish to the freight elevator that morning, his surprise morphed into absolute unhinged rage. "You again?" Marcus snarled, his face contorting. "Are you out of your mind, Clara? Get back to your cubicle before I have you terminated for insubordination." "He is not a beggar, Marcus." "He is Liam's father," Clara shot back, spreading her arms defensively to shield Arthur, her chest heaving as she glared up at the taller man. "You have no right to speak to him this way. Let him drop off the lunch." Marcus's eyes widened for a fraction of a second at the mention of Liam's name, but instead of backing down, the bitter resentment from the morning incident boiled completely over. In Marcus's twisted mind, this was the perfect opportunity to punish the deputy who had humiliated him. Blinded by spite, Marcus scoffed. Like father, like son. Just another piece of trash pretending they belong here. With a violent, dismissive wave of his arm, Marcus shoved Clara out of his way. The force of the push caught her off balance. She stumbled backward in her wet boots, her heel catching on the slick marble, and she crashed hard onto the floor, her glasses flying off her face and clattering against the stone. The entire lobby went completely, terrifyingly silent. Officer Davies froze in horror, and Arthur Sterling, who had stood patiently through every insult thrown his way, looked down at the young woman who had just risked her job to protect him. When Arthur slowly lifted his head to look at Marcus, the gentle, patient mechanic was entirely gone, replaced by the frigid, towering fury of a $14 billion chairman watching a bully cross the final line. Chapter 4: The Last Straw. Up on the 32nd floor, the atmosphere inside Conference Room B was suffocatingly tense. Liam sat at the edge of the long mahogany table, intensely debating supply chain logistics with a team of senior analysts. His mind was fully occupied with the upcoming afternoon presentation, mentally rehearsing the data points for the green technology project. Suddenly, his phone, resting face down on his notepad, vibrated violently. Annoyed by the interruption, Liam flipped it over, expecting an email from a vendor. Instead, it was a frantic text message from Clara. "Liam, emergency in the main lobby. Marcus is harassing your dad. Come down now." Liam's blood ran completely cold. The corporate jargon fading into a dull buzz, he stood up so abruptly that his heavy office chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Ignoring the bewildered stares and mid-sentence protests of the senior analysts, he muttered a breathless apology, grabbed his jacket, and sprinted out of the glass-walled room. He hammered the elevator button, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The descent from the 32nd floor felt like an agonizing eternity. His father, Arthur, was the kindest, most patient man Liam had ever known, a man who had sacrificed everything to raise him in that quiet wooden house. The thought of Marcus, a petty tyrant with a superiority complex, humiliating his aging father in front of hundreds of corporate strangers, made Liam's vision blur with red-hot anger. Down in the expansive marble lobby, a deafening, uncomfortable silence had settled over the crowd. Clara was kneeling on the slick floor, her hands trembling as she searched for her wire-rimmed glasses, which had skittered away when Marcus shoved her. Arthur Sterling stood perfectly still, his calloused hands gripping the handles of the canvas lunch bag. The gentle, weary mechanic's demeanor had completely vanished from Arthur's posture. He was staring at Marcus with a terrifying, absolute stillness, the icy, calculating gaze of a billionaire who was mere seconds away from dismantling a man's entire existence. But before Arthur could utter a single, devastating word, the brass doors of the main elevator chimed loudly and slid apart. Liam burst out of the steel cabin, his chest heaving, his eyes frantically scanning the crowd. He saw Clara on the ground, wiping tears of frustration from her cheeks. He saw his father, standing tall in his faded flannel and wet work boots, completely surrounded by hostile security personnel. And he saw Marcus, standing with his chest puffed out in arrogant triumph. Liam did not walk. He stormed across the lobby. He gently knelt to help Clara to her feet, handing her the fragile glasses, before turning and stepping directly between his father and the lobby manager. He stood like a human shield, his broad shoulders squared, his dark eyes burning with an unyielding, righteous fury. "What did you just do?" Liam demanded, his voice low and vibrating with a dangerous, barely contained rage. Marcus let out a harsh, nasal bark of laughter, clearly emboldened by the whispering crowd of executives gathering to watch the spectacle. "Well, well, look who it is," Marcus sneered, loudly enough for everyone to hear. The lowly deputy manager swoops in to save the day. You can barely keep your own seat in this company, Sterling. You have absolutely zero authority down here. What gives you the right to raise your voice at me? I should have known this filthy vagrant belonged to you. Like father, like son, both of you are absolute trash polluting my lobby. Liam's jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached. He felt Arthur's heavy, warm hand gently rest on his shoulder, a silent, fatherly plea for him to stay calm and not throw away his hard-earned career. But Liam was entirely past the point of diplomacy. You can insult me all you want, Marcus, Liam fired back, his voice ringing clearly across the marble walls. But you will never, ever speak to my father that way. He has built more with his bare, grease-stained hands than you will ever achieve in your entire miserable life. He has more integrity in his little finger than you possess in your entire soul. My. What a touching, pathetic display of family loyalty. A slick, arrogant voice suddenly cut through the heavy tension of the lobby. The crowd parted slightly as Director Richard stepped into the circle. Richard had just returned from a lavish networking lunch. He was a man who practically oozed corporate malice, dressed in an immaculate, custom-tailored charcoal suit that hugged his sharp shoulders, his hair slicked back perfectly, his thin lips twisted into a permanent, predatory sneer. Richard had spent the last 3 years actively trying to crush Liam's spirit, deeply jealous of the younger man's raw engineering talent. Now, seeing Liam involved in a public altercation with an old man in dirty boots, Richard realized he had finally been handed the perfect weapon. He casually buttoned his suit jacket, assessing the situation with cold, calculating eyes, and immediately aligned himself with the lobby manager. Sterling, Richard drawled, stepping up next to a grinning Marcus. I leave the 32nd floor for 1 hour, and I return to find you, causing a chaotic, embarrassing public spectacle. Who is this homeless man? And why is he dripping rainwater all over our corporate headquarters? He is my father, Liam said, his voice dropping to a freezing register, glaring at his boss. He came to bring me lunch, and your lobby manager just physically assaulted one of our junior engineers for trying to help him. Richard waved his manicured hand dismissively, completely uninterested in the truth or Clara's well-being. Marcus is simply doing his job, keeping the unwashed riffraff out of a world-class, multi-billion-dollar facility. You, on the other hand, are a profound embarrassment. I have been looking for a justifiable reason to cleanse my department of your constant insubordination, Liam, and you just handed it to me on a silver platter. Richard leaned in closer, his smile widening into something truly venomous. You are fired, effective immediately. And as for that ridiculous, overly ambitious green technology project you and this clumsy little intern have been wasting my departmental budget on, consider it completely canceled. The prototypes will be thrown in the industrial dumpster by 5 o'clock. We do not tolerate corporate disruption from low-level employees. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered employees. Clara let out a quiet, devastated sob, hiding her face in her hands, as 3 years of grueling, passionate work evaporated into thin air. Marcus crossed his arms, smirking triumphantly at the defeated deputy. They all expected Liam to panic. They expected him to beg for his job, to grovel, to apologize and drag his father out the door in total disgrace. But Liam did not beg. He did not flinch. He reached up to the back of his neck, his fingers closing firmly around the blue Sterling Enterprises lanyard that held his high-clearance security badge. With a single, decisive motion, he pulled it off. Keep the job, Liam said, his voice remarkably calm, echoing with a quiet, undeniable dignity that made Richard's smirk falter. I would rather throw away my entire career and every hour of work I've put into this place than spend another second working for a company that allows cowards to trample on the dignity of a good, honest man. Liam dropped the plastic badge. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, echoing clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the silent lobby. He turned his back entirely on Richard and Marcus, reaching out to gently take his father's arm, fully prepared to walk out into the freezing Seattle rain and leave the corporate world behind forever. Chapter 5. The Chairman's True Identity. The sharp clatter of Liam's plastic security badge hitting the marble floor seemed to echo endlessly in the vast expanse of the lobby. For a fleeting second, the sheer audacity of Liam's resignation hung in the damp air, a heavy testament to a son's unbreakable loyalty. But the silence was quickly shattered by Marcus's cruel, victorious laughter. The lobby manager reveled in the moment, his chest puffed out as he looked at the discarded badge. He turned his attention to Officer Davies, who was still standing nearby, paralyzed by the escalating hostility. "You heard the man," Marcus barked, his voice dripping with venomous authority. "He no longer works here. That makes him and his filthy father trespassers. Davies, call for backup and physically throw these two vagrants out onto the street where they belong. If they resist, call the police." Before the terrified young security guard could even reach for his shoulder radio, a distinct melodic chime cut through the tense atmosphere. It did not come from the standard employee elevator banks. It came from the far end of the lobby, behind a thick crimson velvet rope, where a set of heavy, brushed gold doors stood flush against the marble wall. It was the VIP Express elevator, a biometric locked lift reserved exclusively for the board of directors and the phantom chairman himself. The doors slid apart with a silent hydraulic hiss. Out stepped David Chen, the chief operating officer and the undisputed second most powerful man in Sterling Enterprises. He was accompanied by a young man who had never been seen on the ground floor before. This was Elias Vance, David's newly appointed executive protocol aide. Elias was a 28-year-old prodigy with perfectly parted, ink-black hair and eyes like polished obsidian. Dressed in a razor-sharp, slate-gray suit, Elias possessed the unsettling, hyper-vigilant demeanor of a hunting falcon. He was a man who calculated logistical outcomes and identified corporate threats faster than most supercomputers. Carrying a heavily encrypted biometric tablet tightly against his ribs, Elias moved with a rigid, almost militaristic precision, staying exactly one step behind David's left shoulder as they advanced rapidly across the lobby. Seeing the COO approach, Richard immediately smoothed the lapels of his custom-tailored jacket, completely misreading the situation. He plastered on his most charming, predatory smile, assuming David had descended to personally commend him for neutralizing a disruption. "Mr. Chen, sir," Richard called out smoothly, stepping forward to intercept them. "My deepest apologies for this unsightly disturbance. We were just in the process of terminating a deeply insubordinate deputy and removing this unwashed vagrant from our—" Richard did not get to finish his sentence. David Chen walked directly past him, as if the director were nothing more than a ghost, not even granting him the dignity of a passing glance. David's usually composed, icy demeanor was entirely gone, replaced by a look of sheer, breathless panic. He stopped abruptly in front of the old man in the faded flannel shirt and the muddy work boots. Then, in front of the stunned crowd of executives, security guards, and receptionists, the all-powerful chief operating officer of Sterling Enterprises bowed. It was not a polite nod. It was a deep, rigid, 90-degree bow that conveyed absolute, unwavering reverence. Elias mirrored the gesture instantly, his eyes fixed firmly on the floor. "Chairman Sterling," David's voice rang out, trembling with a mixture of profound respect and sheer terror. "Sir, I had no idea you were arriving today. Why on earth didn't you use the secure VIP underground garage? I would have brought the executive team down to receive you properly. If a bomb had detonated in the center of the lobby, it would have caused less shock." The entire floor instantly plunged into a suffocating, breathless vacuum. Marcus's face drained of all color, transforming into a sickly, chalky white. The arrogant sneer melted off his face, leaving behind a mask of unadulterated horror. His knees visibly knocked together, his expensive leather shoes suddenly feeling like blocks of lead anchoring him to his own doom. Beside him, Richard looked as though he had been struck by a bolt of lightning. The director's jaw went completely slack, his eyes bulging as he stared at the old man he had just ordered thrown into the trash. But no one was more stunned than Liam. He stood frozen, his dark eyes darting between David Chen, the bowing executives, and his father. The cognitive dissonance was almost too heavy to bear. This was Arthur. This was the man who burned their Sunday morning toast, who spent his weekends covered in engine grease under a rusted Ford pickup, who complained about the rising cost of dog food for old Buster. Yet, as Liam stared at him now, a terrifying, magnificent transformation was taking place. Arthur Sterling did not change his clothes, but he changed entirely. The weary slump of his broad shoulders vanished, straightening into a towering, immovable posture. The gentle, crinkling warmth around his pale blue eyes froze over, replaced by the calculating, razor-sharp gaze of an apex predator who had ruthlessly conquered global markets. The humble mechanic evaporated into the ether, and the $14 billion chairman stepped out from behind the facade, radiating a quiet, suffocating aura of absolute power. Arthur slowly reached out and pressed the canvas lunch bag gently into Liam's numb hands. Then, he turned his freezing gaze toward Richard. "Director Richard," Arthur said, his voice no longer loud, but carrying a deadly, vibrating low frequency that seemed to shake the very glass of the building. "Did you honestly believe you could operate a shadow enterprise within my walls without my knowledge? You clearly underestimate the efficiency of my chief of staff's internal surveillance network." Richard stammered, sweat instantly pooling on his forehead, his custom suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. "Sir, Chairman, I assure you, there has been a terrible misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Arthur cut him off effortlessly, the icy precision of his words slicing through the lobby. "I know exactly why you have spent the last 3 years burying my son in administrative sabotage. More importantly, I know exactly why you so eagerly crushed Clara's green technology initiative today." Arthur took a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing Richard to instinctively shrink back. "You did not reject her thermal algorithm because it lacked merit. You rejected it because you are desperately trying to force this company into a highly inflated, exclusive cooling contract with Harrison Dynamics, a shell corporation registered in Delaware that just happens to be wholly owned by your brother-in-law." A collective gasp echoed from the gathered crowd. Clara, still clutching her broken glasses, stared at the chairman in absolute awe, finally understanding why her brilliant work had been so viciously suppressed. "You steal the intellectual property of brilliant junior engineers to pad your own portfolio, and you attempt to embezzle corporate funds into your family's pockets," Arthur continued, his voice echoing like a judge delivering a death sentence. "And today, you attempted to destroy the career of the only man on the 32nd floor who had the courage to stand up to your miserable, cowardly extortion." Arthur stood tall, a king in a frayed flannel shirt, his presence completely dominating the sprawling marble space. Marcus was quietly hyperventilating against the reception desk, and Richard looked as though he might physically collapse. The trap had been sprung, the shadows had been violently illuminated, and the chairman of Sterling Enterprises had finally come to collect his dues. Chapter 6. A costly lesson and a happy ending. The silence that followed Chairman Arthur Sterling's devastating revelation was so absolute that one could hear the heavy patter of the Seattle rain against the towering glass facade. Richard's custom-tailored charcoal suit seemed to swallow him whole as he collapsed inward, his predatory arrogance entirely shattered by the crushing weight of his exposed crimes. Arthur did not raise his voice, nor did he need to. He simply turned to David Chen, who was still standing at rigid attention. "David," Arthur instructed, his tone echoing with the finality of a gavel striking wood, "terminate Director Richard and this lobby manager immediately. Strip their security clearances, seize their company assets, and initiate a full forensic audit of Richard's departmental finances. Furthermore, ensure that the details of their gross misconduct are circulated to every executive board in the technology sector. I want them permanently blacklisted. They will never work in this industry again." Marcus let out a pathetic, strangled whimper, his knees finally giving out as he slumped against the marble reception desk. Officer Davies, the timid security guard who had been terrified of Marcus just minutes prior, now stepped forward with a newfound confidence, placing a firm, unyielding hand on the disgraced manager's shoulder to escort him out into the freezing rain. With the corporate parasites eradicated from the floor, Arthur turned his attention back to the young man standing beside him. Liam was still holding the canvas lunch bag, his dark eyes wide with a storm of overwhelming emotions, shock, confusion, and an incredibly profound realization of the monumental sacrifice his father had made for him. Arthur reached out, placing his thick, calloused hands on Liam's shoulders, completely indifferent to the dampness of his son's jacket. He looked out at the gathered crowd of executives, analysts, and junior staff. "For 24 years, I have hidden my identity from my own son," Arthur announced, his voice suddenly swelling with an immeasurable, fierce pride that warmed the cold marble lobby. "I did not want him to be poisoned by the entitlement that wealth so often breeds. I wanted him to learn the true value of hard work, of empathy, and of standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Today, he proved that he has learned those lessons flawlessly." Arthur paused, looking deeply into Liam's eyes. "This is Liam Sterling. He is my biological son, and he's the sole heir to the Sterling Enterprises empire. But his true inheritance is not this building, nor the billions in our accounts. His true inheritance is his unwavering integrity, and that is a currency worth more than anything I could have ever built." The lobby erupted into spontaneous, deafening applause. Liam, overcome with emotion, pulled his father into a tight, grounding embrace, burying his face in the familiar, comforting scent of motor oil and rain that still clung to Arthur's flannel shirt. In the weeks that followed, the landscape of Sterling Enterprises transformed completely, guided by a new era of compassionate leadership. The very first executive order signed by Liam, who had officially assumed the role of chief executive officer alongside his father's chairmanship, was the immediate and fully funded approval of the green technology algorithm. Clara was summoned to the 32nd floor, not to be berated, but to be celebrated. She was officially promoted to lead designer of the Green Initiatives division, provided with a massive, unprecedented budget, and given a sprawling corner office. Clara's trademark anxiety slowly melted away, replaced by a quiet, brilliant confidence. She no longer hid behind oversized sweaters. She stood tall, knowing that her intellect was fiercely protected by the very men who owned the sky above her. Meanwhile, the universe dispensed its own brutal, poetic justice to those who had abused their fleeting power. Blacklisted from every corporate entity in the country, Marcus found himself entirely destitute. Stripped of his gold-plated watch and tailored suits, he was forced to take the only job that would hire him without a background check: a night shift sanitation worker in a decaying, rat-infested slum on the industrial outskirts of the city. Here, Marcus reported to Hank, a burly, 50-something sanitation foreman with a thick neck, a permanent, scowling grimace, and a high-vis vest that barely zipped over his pronounced stomach. Hank was a man who possessed zero tolerance for arrogance and cared only about the physical labor at hand. "Hey, pretty boy," Hank bellowed one miserable Tuesday night, kicking a rusted dumpster that sent a shiver of dread down Marcus's spine. "Stop staring at the puddles and get this alley mopped up. And if you give me lip again, you're scrubbing the public transit toilets with a toothbrush." Marcus, shivering in his soiled, foul-smelling uniform, tightly gripped his mop and bowed his head, forced to swallow the exact same toxic, degrading contempt he had once so eagerly poured onto others. Yet, despite the dramatic upheaval in the corporate hierarchy and the public unmasking of a billionaire, the most profound thing about the Sterling men was exactly what remained unchanged. Several months later, the Seattle rain was falling in its usual, endless mist over the quiet, pine-scented outskirts of the city. Inside the drafty wooden house, the glow of a warm yellow lamp pushed back the twilight. Buster, the elderly golden retriever, was snoring softly on a braided rug by the fireplace, occasionally twitching his paws in a deep sleep. At the battered, scarred wooden dining table sat the chairman and the young CEO of a $14 billion global empire. There were no Michelin-starred chefs, no silver platters, and no servants. Instead, Arthur was proudly serving thick, messy slices of his famous slow-roasted beef on sourdough, while Liam poured hot black coffee from a dented steel thermos. They sat together in comfortable, companionable silence, reviewing global supply chain reports on their laptops while sharing a humble meal. Arthur Sterling had gone to unimaginable lengths to ensure his wealth did not ruin his son, and as he watched Liam laugh at a joke and toss a small piece of beef to the waking dog, he knew he had succeeded. They were exactly where they belonged, two mechanics at heart, steering a massive corporate machine with hands that were strong, minds that were sharp, and souls that remained entirely, beautifully uncorrupted. The story of Arthur and Liam teaches us a beautiful lesson about what truly matters. True wealth is not defined by the money in your bank account or the expensive clothes you wear. It is measured by the integrity in your heart and the way you treat the people around you. Arthur had everything, yet he chose to give his son the priceless gift of a good character. In our daily lives, it is so easy to get caught up in chasing success and judging others by their jobs or appearances. We often forget that the most valuable things we can build are kindness, respect, and a strong work ethic. Whether you are the leader of a large company or someone working hard every day to make ends meet, your character is your true legacy. We should always remember to treat everyone with dignity, because you never know the burdens others carry or the true value they bring to the world. If this story touched your heart, please share it with your family and friends. Leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts, and please subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you more meaningful stories like this one. May God bless each and every one of you watching this video today. May He give you the strength to work with honest hands, the wisdom to raise a loving family, and the grace to remain humble no matter how much success comes your way. If you believe that a good heart and a kind soul are the greatest wealth a person can have, please comment Amen below.